Diddy behind bars. It's something we thought we'd never see, and at this point, he's called MDC Brooklyn home for about 8 months. We're taking a look back at Diddy's life behind bars so far and what could be ahead. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Sierra Gillespie. There really is a lot to cover when it comes to Sean P. Diddy Combs and his stint in jail. It's crazy to think at one point there were talks of house arrest or even his proposal that he stay in his mansion in Miami. As we both know, that did not happen, and P. Diddy is still behind bars. He is not on house arrest. He's been there since September of 2024 when the federal indictment came down, and he suddenly was charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. And now's a really good time to remind you that P. Diddy has denied the allegations. I mean, first they came out in civil lawsuits, denied all of those. And in this case, the federal side of things, he's actually pleaded not guilty. He's not been convicted of a crime and is actually planning to go to jury trial. Right now we're underway with jury selection, and trial openings are set to begin on May 12th. What we haven't talked about in a while, though, leading up to all of this, is the grand jury proceedings. That is really what led to Diddy's indictment, thus his arrest, thus him living in MDC Brooklyn. So way back in September, he was indicted by a grand jury in New York, and he actually kind of knew that this was happening. He was in New York for about a week leading up to all of this. There had been talks, obviously, with his attorneys, his legal team, and he went to New York, we believe, because he was going to basically turn himself over. He was at the Park Hyatt in New York City when he was arrested by Homeland Security, and we'll talk about this in the interview, but honestly, I've covered so many P. Diddy stories, and it's like the early days of this, back when he was arrested, it's like a blur, and I'm like, wait, I totally forgot. Like, we thought he was going to get out. He did not get bond. I want to talk about that in a minute, though. He immediately was taken to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. It's also known as MDC, which is probably what I'm going to call it for the rest of this interview. Now, he wanted bond right away, as I said, and his legal team was like, hey, let's get him out of MDC. They even suggested that he be transferred to a completely different jail in Essex County, New Jersey, because a motion from Diddy's team called MDC not fit for pretrial detention. Mark Agnifilo is one of his attorneys, who I'm probably going to talk about a lot in the coming weeks. But according to Agnifilo, MDC had really poor conditions, overcrowding, violence, even staffing issues. And according to Agnifilo, there was kind of a sordid history as far as MDC goes. He alleges that 2 inmates were killed in the months leading up to Diddy's arrest. So between June and September, where Diddy's arrest was, 2 inmates had been killed. That 4 inmates died by suicide over the past 3 years, and additionally 6 staffers, so correctional officers or whoever had been working there, had been charged with crimes over the past 5 years. So he's saying MDC not looking like a great place, which, by the way, quick interruption, leading up to our interview, I just wanted to tease ahead that the person we're talking to, Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, actually worked at MDC as a warden. So keep that in mind, so he knows a bit about MDC. Now, according to the bail proposal way back when, it would be $50 million that Diddy would have to put up in order to be released on house arrest. So the co-signers would be not only Diddy, but his mom, his sister, 3 of his adult sons, and 2 of the mothers of his children. So according to the defense, there would be a lot of things going along with this. There would be restrictions on Diddy's travel, for example. He would have a GPS monitor. He would even have a limited number of female visitors. There could be a list of people who were like, yes, these people are approved. No, these people are not. And originally it was suggested that Diddy should be released to his Miami mansion. You know, he could be on house arrest there. The judge almost right away was like, nope, not happening at all. An additional suggestion when Miami was turned down was that Diddy remain in New York, this time actually in the Upper East Side in an apartment. And if this was to go through, this is what the defense suggested, that there would be 2 live-in guards at this apartment watching Diddy, monitoring him. And there would be another one downstairs, that Diddy wouldn't have any access to phones or the internet. The only way that he could use it to communicate would be to his legal team or pre-approved people. So we're talking about his family, like a list that had been completely vetted and approved by the court. And this is something that really was reported about a lot at the time, that Mark Agnifilo said there was a, quote, 0% chance that Diddy would be violent if he was released. And he even called this bail package a, quote, very, very rigorous set of conditions, more strict even than MDC jail. Interesting to note. Now, this was denied multiple times. As we've reported, P. Diddy is still at MDC right now. So let's talk about his journey there, so to speak. When Diddy first was booked, he was put on suicide watch. And I did some research about this. According to the DOJ's National Institute of Corrections, this suicide watch is, quote, supervisory precautions taken for suicidal inmates that require frequent observation. So that's just what Diddy had right away. He was on suicide watch, had this observation just to make sure no self-harm, that he's safe. Eventually, he was moved off suicide watch. However, he still was housed in a protective care unit. And the people who are housed in this area could be there for a multitude of reasons. I mean, it could be high-profile inmates, for instance, like Diddy, or it could be people who are extra at risk. But I guess going back to the high-profile side of things, another person who was also there too, this made headlines, Sam Bankman-Fried. You might recognize that name, Sam Bankman-Fried, or maybe even his face. He's actually been convicted of fraud and money laundering after the collapse of his cryptocurrency exchange called FTX. So for a time, he was in the same unit as Diddy. Diddy was there for a while, but eventually he was moved to general population, or Gen Pop is probably what you might know it as. And there are some interesting reports from this time, like just an inside look at what prison culture could kind of be like. So there are reports that he was befriended by some inmates, or maybe he befriended them. Either way, he had allegedly some inmate friends, some pals, and there were some interesting reports. For instance, one of the reports was that these other inmates were making Diddy's bed for him. And there were other reports that some of these inmates would do Diddy's chores for him or give him snacks, or that Diddy was trading canned goods with these people kind of as his form of currency. And then one that really, really made a lot of headlines is the fact, or the allegation, that some of these people would allow P. Diddy to use their phone accounts. And according to the prosecution, they filed some stuff about this because they're like, wait, hold up. You're not allowed to use someone else's phone account, number one. But number two, Diddy was allegedly doing this so that the feds wouldn't listen in, because as we know, all of these jailhouse phone calls are being recorded. So if Diddy uses his personal account, obviously the feds are going to pay closer attention to that. So according to them, this is all an allegation, that it was Diddy's theory that if he used a different inmate's account, that they wouldn't be looking at it or monitoring it. And so he was trying to use those accounts allegedly to speak with some people who were not on his approved list. The feds say that Diddy reached out to 8 different inmates at least, and used allegedly 8 different accounts by these people to corruptly influence witness testimony. That's what they said in one of their filings. And to taint the jury pool from behind bars, which is interesting. Prosecutors wrote, quote, while attempting to evade law enforcement monitoring, the defendant, meaning P. Diddy, has, among other things, orchestrated social media campaigns that are, in his own words, aimed at tainting the jury pool, made efforts to publicly leak materials he views as helpful to his case, and contacted witnesses through third parties. Interesting now that we're in jury selection. So I guess do with that what you will. Now, there were a couple of other reports too. One, that Diddy was allegedly paranoid about being poisoned in some of his food, which we'll talk about in the interview. It seems like that's not a very high likelihood that that would ever be possible. There were also a couple of reports that Diddy had a breakdown right around the holidays. Now, this is going back to a Daily Mail article. A person close to Diddy, their name was not specified, but they apparently told the Daily Mail, quote, spending the holidays behind bars was a nightmare for him, meaning P. Diddy. And this same friend told the Daily Mail, quote, he eventually managed to calm himself down with the meditation technique he's been using while he's been behind bars. It took him a few hours of deep breathing and focusing to get out of the bad space he was in, but he finally managed it. There were more reports that were cited about Diddy's happenings in and out of MDC, and I say out because of this next report. This is from the New York Post, that on January 30th of this year, Diddy was actually taken to a Brooklyn hospital. They specifically noted that it was in the cover of darkness at about 10 p.m. because he needed an MRI. He had issues with his knee. And this is kind of a long-standing thing. Before Diddy was in the headlines for any of these allegations, he had had a knee injury after running a marathon. So this has been kind of an ongoing thing. And according to this New York Post article, he was taken there to get an MRI and then taken back to MDC. And I actually spoke with our future guest, who you'll hear in the interview in a couple of minutes, D. Wayne Hendricks, and he said, yeah, this totally checks out. Like, of course, they're going to do it on a random Thursday night at 10 p.m. because it's P. Diddy. People recognize his name and his face, and we don't want this to be a huge situation where a lot of people are drawn to this. We don't want any of the inmates, or excuse me, any of the officers to be in danger because of this. We don't want P. Diddy, the inmate, to be in danger. So it makes sense that this would have happened in the cover of darkness. Now, at the time, Mark Agnifilo, his attorney, told TMZ, quote, "I cannot comment on anything related to prisoner movements. Also, I'm not commenting on anything related to possible medical issues." And another statement was also released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons related to this too. It says, quote, "For privacy, safety, and security reasons, we do not comment on the conditions of confinement for anyone in our custody to include medical status or medical trips." So I guess TBD on that. We don't have any confirmation 100% for sure. So do with that what you will. But there is reporting that I can confirm 100% because it came right from Law&Crime. This one has a little clip for you to watch.
From that video of, I think that was obtained by Daily Mail back in September, of Diddy playing hacky sack in Central Park, to now he appeared just astonishingly thinner, which you can expect to be inside a federal detention center for a couple months now. A lot different from the luxury lifestyle that he was living before.
That was our own reporter, Elizabeth Milner, who you're going to be hearing a lot from in the coming weeks because she will be in the courtroom for all of it, jury selection right now, and then moving forward with the rest of the trial. But she was in the courtroom back in December. That's when the specific clip kind of came to light. And this was seeing Diddy for the first time in kind of a while. And Elizabeth's quote really made the round. She was actually even featured in Page 6 talking about Diddy's appearance, that he was astonishingly thin. She's also noted that he's gone a lot more gray since his arrest, which is interesting to note. We've also seen that in some of the courtroom sketches or renderings. And actually, speaking of Diddy's appearance, we kind of know what to expect at trial based on a recent filing. Here's what it says, quote, "It is hereby ordered that the defendant, Sean Combs, inmate number 374-52054, interesting that we now know his number, will be permitted to receive non-prison clothing at the MDC to wear for his trial scheduled to begin on May 5th, 2025. He is permitted to have up to 5 button-down shirts, up to 5 pairs of pants, up to 5 sweaters, up to 5 pairs of socks, and up to 2 pairs of shoes without laces to wear to court." So that's what Diddy will be wearing in court, but at night, it's back to that MDC jumpsuit. He'll be sleeping in his jailhouse cot. And again, that's really the topic of this episode, Diddy's life behind bars. So now's a really good time to throw to our interview for a look behind bars. Our guest today is back by popular demand. One of Scandal's favorite guests is Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, former warden and correctional officer. Thank you so much for coming on with us. I love to pick your brain about all things jail. And now that we're talking Diddy, I've got a lot of questions. So let's wind back the clock to September of last year. P. Diddy is arrested. What does it look like right then for a guy who's used to these lavish mansions? He has multiple homes. He was arrested actually at a hotel in Manhattan. And then all of a sudden he's going to MDC Brooklyn. What happens then?
Well, I'm sure it was a total shock to him. Obviously, there were reports that he came back to New York because he was going to turn himself in. So he knew there was going to be some sort of law enforcement contact, especially with the courts and the processing. But I don't think in his mind was not going to be held. I think in his mind he was going to turn himself in and then get booked and then get bail and then go back home and spend some time and prepare for trial. But I think he was definitely shocked in the sense of being arrested at a hotel after spending the day before at a park, just kind of hanging out in Central Park there in New York. So the initial phase for him was definitely shocking. Going, like you said, going from two several thousand feet mansions in LA and in Miami, Florida, to a 8x8 cell. By yourself. Trying to figure out, okay, wow, these guys picked me up. I didn't think they were going to do that. So there was a process of him being on suicide watch and then doing a threat assessment to see if he could be housed outside of the special housing unit. So I could imagine those first few days, especially the first 3 to 4 days before he got settled in, was a total shock to him. And to his credit, although we heard some reports of him kind of being a little upset about the food and the conditions, but to his credit, he did find his footing over these last several months while he was awaiting trial.
You brought up a really good point because now that we're on the eve of trial, we can see that P. Diddy has been denied bail slash bond the entire time. He's been at MDC the entire time. However, way back in September when he's first arrested, a lot of people, likely Diddy himself included, are thinking that he's going to be released on potentially house arrest or something. So you're right to remind us that he went in thinking, this might not be that long. And now he's been there for months and months. So crazy. And actually, one of the things that his attorneys first talked about when they were trying to post bond or bail were like the conditions at MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which you're very familiar with, which I think is why we first spoke talking about that. They were saying, oh, the conditions are terrible. You know, it's not suitable for anyone to be there. What do you think about the conditions there?
Well, I mean, over several years, I mean, going all the way back to the 90s, there have been several different scandals at the facility, starting back in the early 90s with the mafia case where there were staff that were being compromised by, mafia bosses and bringing in contraband and different things of that nature, to a captain and staff abusing inmates on the elevator, to a correctional officer getting pregnant by an individual who was awaiting retrial for murdering two undercover cops in Staten Island, and then to just several situations that has happened there through the years. I mean, the place is 1 million square feet. You have an east building and a west building, so there's been a lot of things said and done, and well documented about the place. However, one thing I will say, having worked there 3 years myself, you have highly dedicated individuals there to try to take care of business. And then every now and then, there's just something that happens at MDC Brooklyn that brings negative attention to the institution. But when you're talking about housing, upwards of 3,500 inmates a day, feeding them, providing medical care, security, and all those different things. So things can happen, but unfortunately now, I mean, they don't have that many inmates in the building, and for a person like P Diddy, he's not housed with what we call killers and dealers on the sixth and seventh floor in the west building. I mean, he's over in the east side in a more um, relaxed atmosphere, with maybe 20 other individuals whose crimes that they have allegedly committed aren't anything serious enough to where he would have to be looking over his back on a day-to-day basis. But like, to your point, yes, there has been issues at that facility throughout the years. But I will say, having been there myself, and sometimes questioning, like, what are we doing? But at the same time, there are dedicated people there to keep people safe, and I think that's what they're doing there right now with him. So.
Yeah, I think for anyone, it would be a huge culture shock just generally, like the life inside prison. In past interviews, you and I have talked about that, how they kind of have their own, I'm not going to say government, they have their own culture there, prison culture. So I'm sure it was definitely a shock for P. Diddy, who hadn't been somewhere like MDC before. And we had previously reported that he was nervous for a time. This was according to reports. I mean, P. Diddy himself didn't come out and say this, but according to reports, he was nervous that people were potentially poisoning his food. And I believe I talked to you about this, and your thoughts are no, that wouldn't have been possible for somebody to actually get in and poison P. Diddy.
No, the food is prepared, in a jail setting like that. The food is prepared, days in advance, because, I mean, you have to put foods on carts and then take it over to the unit. And then they have small, we call kitchenettes in each pod. And that food is warmed up and they're put in trays. So, I mean, an elaborate plan like that, I mean, so many people would have to be involved. And there's thousands of meals that are being prepared across the country in federal and state and local prisons and jails across the country. And one of the things that you haven't really heard of is anyone really getting sick from the food, because, again, if you want to lose your institution, if you don't provide good food, or at least adequate food and adequate medical care, those are the two quickest ways to cause riots or cause a lot of problems in your facilities. Now, again, is this food like 5 star? Is this something that you're going to go like, hey, I want to go to jail so I can get a jail meal tonight? No, you're not going to do that. But it's going to be palatable enough to where, you can consume it without, worrying about either being ill or someone trying to take you out. I think a part of that was maybe paranoia on his part. And again, I have no idea about his drug use other than reports that I've heard in terms of his possible defense and different things of that nature. And maybe that was some mental paranoia that was going on initially when he got first arrived at the facility. And again, being confined, think about, you have your own plane, you have your own chef, you have a spa. From what I understand, he had a spa in one of his homes where he can get massages and relax and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden now you're told when to eat, when to sleep. You can't move. You can't pick up a phone when you want to. So I think those are elements of, possibly having a little bit of paranoia at the initial phases of him being at the institution.
Yeah, let's talk about that because when he first arrived, he was in seclusion. He was actually on suicide watch for a time in like a special unit before he eventually got
Mhm.
moved to Gen Pop, general population. Can you talk about that, what that would look like versus his transition into Gen Pop?
Well, again, especially with the high profile nature of his case, who he is, and especially being similar to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, you know, I can tell you that up until the time, obviously, we knew that Epstein was in special housing up until the time he committed suicide. And Ghislaine Maxwell was also in special housing. However, she had some different protocols, I think, to make sure that, if she had any suicidal ideation, that staff would be immediately, will be able to respond to any issues that she may be having or had. And I think what the agency, and that was at MCC New York as far as Epstein, but like I was saying earlier, with it having a million square feet, and the population being as low as it is, after they were able to do a threat assessment, kind of look at his mental and all of that, they were able to put him in a housing unit where we would consider putting ex cops or cops who may have been arrested for whatever, being compromised or corrupt, and putting them with, inmates that are being charged with sex offenses. And typically, you don't want to put cops in a normal general population unit because obviously they could be running into people they've seen before on the streets. So you don't want to have that. And also, some sex offenders, I mean, they just have a hard time walking on any compound or any jail. So that being said, they were able to transition him from the special housing unit after a short period of time, probably a week or two, and put him in a unit where he could go about doing his business, preparing for trial. However, I will say, if he is found guilty, he will then get the real experience of what prison life will be like, because at that point there will be no catering to his individual needs, so to speak. So.
Oh, that'll be interesting. I know I'm definitely going to want to ask you some questions about that as we move forward with trial to see, what could it look like if he is convicted.
Mhm.
So that'll be interesting. You did talk about where he
Yes.
is right now, though, all of that's
Mhm.
happening. And we had seen a couple of reports that he, I don't know if I could say is friends with some of the inmates, but at least was friendly in a way. Some of the
Mhm.
reports were that he had other inmates making his bed for him, or that he was
Mhm.
using the phone privileges of other inmates. And these allegations were so that he could use their phone and it would be recorded, and they wouldn't, like, the prosecutors wouldn't then listen to P. Diddy's recordings of his own, recordings. But that doesn't make sense to me. I think it's been
Mhm.
debunked completely because they're going to be listening to everything. But I guess, what do you think
Right.
about his relations with other inmates?
Well, I think, after the initial phase of being in jail and like, okay, this is my environment, this is where I'm going to have to live, and I'm going to have to get focused to prepare for trial and hopefully being able to be found out guilty and go home. But in the meantime, this is my environment. So I think you always have a couple of individuals on the unit that's going to welcome inmates on the pod or on the floor or in the detention center or wherever location that may be. And again, inmates use their commissary as currency. There's some reports that he was bartering cans of tuna for favors, and that's what inmates do. I mean, they don't have cash, so they barter, and maybe some of the inmates had respect for him for his music or the way his business acumen, and maybe they're trying to get up to him saying, hey, I'll make your bed for you. If you can help, I got a cousin that wants to get in the music business. Not that I don't know how many people that's really going to help Diddy out right now in the music business because of his current situation. But, inmates are always trying to exchange favors, or maybe hey, this person just likes him and say, hey, I want to do this for you because I know you're so stressed out. I mean, you see, it's whatever happens in society, it happens behind the walls. It just happens in their own little framework of how they go about living their lives and assimilating to that culture. Um, and again, he's not in a unit where you're probably going to find a lot of shanks, what we call homemade weapons and different things of that nature. So it's to me, it's more of like a camp setting because it's open bay, bunk bed style unit. So the confines of where he is a little bit more friendlier, I believe, than if he was actually in a more traditional detention unit.
That's so interesting to hear because I bet comparatively it is friendlier, as you said, or more hospitable than the traditional setting.
Mhm,
But there have been a couple of reports that Diddy himself
mhm,
had a breakdown in regards to all of this. And actually, if I went
mhm,
back in my timeline of my mind, I believe this happened around the holidays. And some people were
mhm,
speculating, this is his first, Christmas without his family. Maybe he's upset about all
mhm.
of that. What do you think about
Right.
the theory that he potentially had a breakdown in there?
I'm not surprised. I mean, think about it. It's holiday season. I believe his birthday is sometime in November or December. So, I mean, his first birthday without having, a celebration, again, not being able to call on your chef, you have a craving for your favorite food or your favorite dessert, and no one's coming to your aid when you want them to come to your aid. And then again, the holiday season is a high time, not just in a jail setting, but also in the community where people are missing their loved ones, if they're disconnected with their families. So again, and then being able to, because I don't know how charming this guy is. I mean, from what I can see, from what the media reports are, he can just say, "Hey, give me this, I want that," and people just come and run and at his beck and call. So even when you're he's dealing with staff. I mean, if staff aren't sitting there trying to be compromised and bring certain things into the facility to make his accommodations a little bit more friendlier for him, I just think he's wasn't used to that type of structure, and most people aren't. Nobody wants to be confined behind bars. No one, at the end of the day. So, but when you talk about a person like him who's for over the last 34, 35 years has the world at the palm of his hands, and then all of a sudden that shuts down. I mean, I'm actually going to give him a little credit for just having one or two little breakdowns and not more. So, but we'll see as the trial progresses and different things. And I think it'll be very important that they keep an eye on him, especially as the trial progresses, because if it doesn't go his way, we may see him back on suicide watch or something like in that nature. Because I mean, if he is convicted, we're talking, 20, 30 year sentence here. And for someone who's going to be 56 toward the end of the year, I mean, that's almost like a life sentence. So yeah, so we'll see what kind of tantrums that may happen in the future, depending on how the trial goes, especially as some of these witnesses come up, start talking about, and we start hearing some real details about some of these allegations. So it's going to be very important that they keep an eye on him on a daily basis when he comes back from that courtroom every day.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine that his mental health has something going on inside. I mean, I can just assume that. And it's interesting too because we don't know what's going on in his mind. We can speculate that, maybe he's having a couple of breakdowns or uncertainty here and there.
Yeah.
But what we can see visually is that Diddy himself looks so much different than when he first went in. I
Mhm.
mean, he had dark hair and now he's come out, he's much thinner. He's got white or gray hair, has been compared to Santa Claus, even, not looking like the
Right.
Diddy we all saw in the magazines. So what do you make of that, him changing his appearance so much? Is it just the wear and tear or the stress behind bars?
I think it's all those things you just said. I always tell people when you put on that uniform, that jumpsuit, no matter what color it is, and you're wearing somebody else's underwear that 15 other people wore 10 years ago. I mean, it does change you, and as a warden, I would have like a crowd of new inmates, maybe 15 or 20 at a time, every couple of weeks when they bring in new prisoners. And I would just talk to them about, you know, getting your mind right, getting your head space in a good place and connecting with family because it does change you, and we're talking about somebody's appearance. I mean, one, they're not eating the same diet. Two, we don't have hair dye. I know, and I'm not saying he dyed his hair, but obviously he must have been because if he went gray within 3 months, then, obviously he probably had the best cosmetology folks, helping them, estheticians and masseuses and, physical trainers and that kind of thing, kind of keeping him young and healthy and strong because he has a lot of energy, based on what I've seen through the years. I mean, this guy has just had a lot of energy. He's a hard worker. And then all of a sudden now you don't have a studio to go to. You don't have business meetings. You're not doing those things that you've been doing for 30, 40 years. It will take a quick toll on you. And so, I mean, that's kind of what it is. You pull the curtain back and you take some of these resources from a person, especially at his age, uh, then obviously you're going to have a person losing a little bit of weight and looking a little bit older. Um, and then two, is he really getting the rest? I mean, they get this little small mattress, one little pillow that really don't have much feather in it, one small blanket, unless somebody's going to allow you to use their blanket. I mean, depending on if he likes to be warm or cold or whatever. So it just your whole life changes, and so hopefully he is staying in a good mental space to try to fight for his freedom, and then we'll see about his guilt or innocence based on what the jury says after everybody hears the evidence, and but I'm not surprised at all, and if he does get out, probably within about 6 months, he'll probably go back to looking just like he looked before because he'll have he may or may not have all the resources that he had before, depending on how much money he's going to lose or has had to spend on his legal defense and, what kind of business partnerships he'll have moving forward. But at least, if he is found not guilty, he'll have his freedom. So.
There's so many things to consider. What he's experienced so far in prison for sure is so interesting. And then as you're talking about the potential for the future now that we're headed to trial. So this is something I definitely am going to keep following. And I'm sure you will too. We'll definitely have you back on as the trial moves forward so we can talk about potential, what could happen either way. But for today, Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, thank you for coming on Scandal and talking with us.
Thank you.
What's ahead for P. Diddy from here? Well, we know for sure he'll be at MDC at least for the foreseeable future. That is because trial's expected to last 8 to 10 weeks. So he'll be at MDC at least for that long. Now, if the jury returns a guilty verdict, that would mean a federal prison sentence. So I guess we'll have to wait and see which way deliberations go. And you're definitely going to want to see that. You're going to want to see what's leading up to that too. So make sure to subscribe to our channel now and send us any emails you may have, future episode suggestions, whatever's on your mind. Scandal@lawandcrime.com is our email. I am your host, Gillespie, and thank you so much for watching today's episode of Scandal.